The surgical room aboard the Virillian ship was silent, the kind of silence that felt heavier with every scan. Above the table, sensor arrays hovered smoothly, covering the patient in soft blue light. The patient, unconscious and half undressed, lay still. Only his vital signs flickered on the monitors, irregular and unpredictable. Chief Medical Artisan Ulu tilted his long head, confused. The top stalk on his skull twitched, a clear sign he was annoyed. "Why is it so hairy?" he asked aloud, breaking the rule about speaking during a scan. "Localized skin-level keratin growth," his assistant answered, tapping on the console. "Some of it might be for heat control, but the pattern is strange. Look on the shoulders, chest, even the lower back. It's not consistent." Ulu leaned closer to the patient. The human's name was Daniel Grayson, an engineer from the Earth colony Accord. He'd been injured when a scaffolding collapsed on Sigma-12, bruises, 3 broken ribs, and a torn spleen. They'd stabilized him on the way here, but full genetic scans were standard for non-Virillian patients before surgery. As the scanner moved down Daniel's body, thick patches of hair showed up on the display, not just on his head and arms, but on his chest, sides, and back. Some areas looked like spirals, like the hair had grown in strange circular patterns. Ulu narrowed his main eye. "This doesn't match normal human structure." Just then, the sedation monitor dimmed. The human let out a soft groan and opened his eyes. His face was partly covered by a breathing mask, but he gave a weak chuckle. "Blame my dad's side," Daniel said, dryly amused. Ulu blinked. "That's not a medical answer," he replied slowly. "Nope," Daniel said, cracking one eye open. "But it's true. My uncle looks like a black bear lost a bet with a rug. It's genetics, recessive, mostly." "You were advised not to speak during sedation window," the assistant interjected. Daniel just blinked. "Yeah, well, you try sleeping through a full-body CAT scan with 0 privacy and 6 eyeballs watching your chest hair like it's plotting rebellion." Ulu huffed. A short, flute-like exhale that humans often mistook for disdain, but, among Virillians, indicated deep intellectual engagement. He gestured for another scan. "Hair as heat retention is logical," Ulu said, "but your planet has constructed artificial environments to offset thermal imbalance. Why does your body persist in outdated adaptations?" Daniel shrugged slightly, then winced. The broken ribs were wrapped, but even minor movement triggered pain. He clenched his jaw. "You ever heard of evolution not getting the memo?" Ulu didn't answer. Instead, he focused on the live imagery feeding through the scanner. The damage to Daniel's spleen was healing faster than expected. Not unnatural, but accelerated, considering the lack of regenerative implants. "There is scarring here," the assistant noted, zooming in. "Old injuries. Repaired through endogenous mechanisms." Ulu scanned the records. Broken left femur 4 years ago, right wrist fracture, both clavicles, scapular fissure, pulmonary contusion. Why was he returned to fieldwork without structural reinforcement? "They offered me plates," Daniel muttered. "I told them I'd wait for the bone to set. Didn't want metal messing with the cold weather gear." "You refused surgical reinforcement for long bone trauma." Ulu stared. "And it recovered?" 7 weeks. Little longer for the limp to fade. Not my best summer. "This is inefficient." "Maybe," Daniel said. "But I'm still here." There was a quiet pause. It stretched long enough for Ulu to query the central archive. Comparative physiology came up empty. No other species on record took so many structural hits and just patched themselves up the slow way. Most either integrated artificial support, relied on communal bioprinting, or simply failed to survive similar trauma. "Explain your persistence," Ulu said. "Your skeletal design is not ideal. You do not hibernate. You do not regenerate. Your temperature regulation wastes fluid. You lack cortical redundancies. And yet you endure." Daniel closed his eyes again, tired now. "We don't need to be ideal. We just need to not give up." The next scan rolled in. Ulu's assistant let out a chime of surprise. Fracture callus is already forming. 3 days post-injury, no stabilizer. Humans don't use cortical foam, Ulu asked. Not for ribs, Daniel replied. They heal on their own. Hurts like hell. You get used to sleeping like a statue. A silence settled. Not awkward. Contemplative. Ulu circled the table, making a slow loop as he absorbed the full physiological profile of his patient. Imperfect, redundant, hairy in ways that defied current models. But something else lurked beneath the anomalies. Something deeper. Adaptability. This man had walked through repeated trauma, healed the long way, accepted pain not as a flaw but as part of the repair process. Even the hair and outdated thermal adaptation still had a role. Redundant systems kept redundancy from becoming fatal. Ulu pulled up Daniel's environmental history. Planetary origin, Earth, region listed as Upper Michigan. Severe winters, summer heat waves, high predation zones in early ancestry. He turned back to the monitors. You were not engineered for optimization. You were engineered by chaos. Daniel snorted. That's one way to say it. Your body is a chronicle of environmental punishment, not efficiency, survival despite dysfunction. Daniel cracked a tired smile. Now you're getting it. The assistant chirped uneasily. We should prep for internal correction of the spleen. Delay much longer and his system will destabilize. Ulu agreed. He watched the vitals, adjusted the surgical arm, and issued commands for nanolytic prep. But the puzzle of Daniel Grayson didn't fade as the tools descended. It deepened. Every old scar was a story, every regrown bone a silent rebellion against fragility. He had expected anomalies. Instead, he found something far more disruptive: resilience. And as the first incision was made, Ulu didn't see a broken mammal on a slab. He saw a blueprint, one that didn't follow the rules, one shaped by failure, pain, and ridiculous quantities of body hair, but still standing, still healing, still human. 3 days after the surgery, Daniel was still on the Virillian vessel, confined to a biostabilization chamber that resembled a transparent cocoon mounted inside a rotating diagnostic ring. The air was cool, dry, and utterly sterile. His torso was wrapped in medical mesh, a soft network of biosilk that pulsed faintly with embedded microcurrents. The spleen had been sutured internally using nanothreads, and his ribs, while still fractured, had begun laying down proper healing matrix. He hadn't said much since the procedure. The pain medication was unfamiliar, less numbing, and more distant. He didn't feel the pain until he moved, and when he did, it came back with authority. Still, he wasn't fond of laying around for days with nothing but alien diagnostics and their too quiet humming. Ulu hovered into the chamber for the third post-op exam, flanked by 2 younger medical apprentices. One held a spherical instrument that cast rotating organ projections into the air. Daniel squinted at his own spleen, now surrounded by a dense halo of regrowth. Your metabolic waste markers are high, Ulu said. Are you resisting elimination? Daniel sighed. If you mean constipation, yeah. Your nutrient pace doesn't really get things moving. We modeled it on your dietary needs. Well, I don't eat my dietary needs. I eat chili, black coffee, and regret. Ulu made a clicking sound, not with a mouth, but a vocal sac at the base of his throat. The apprentices recorded it as a neutral note of confusion. I must ask, Ulu said slowly, why do your people continue field labor after major trauma without reinforcement protocols? There are several records in your file: cranial impacts, dislocated shoulder, a torn ligament that appears to have been treated with ice? Yeah, I wrapped it, iced it, and limped for a month. It healed. That is not a method, that is attrition. Daniel gave a slow nod. That's kind of our thing. Ulu extended a probe and gently examined Daniel's abdomen. The ribs were still tender. Any pressure there made him flinch. He gritted his teeth. You require 4 more weeks for full callus ossification. Ulu said. Minimum. You will not be cleared for locomotion-intensive activity until then. Got it. And yet, I read your file. Your species often violates these advisories. Why? Daniel adjusted his posture. Because waiting doesn't pay the bills, and because sometimes you just have to keep moving. Ulu paused. Even when injured? Especially then. The medical apprentices stared. Their species valued stasis during healing, complete sensory deprivation and metabolic slowdown. Human recovery, in contrast, looked like a war of inches. Explain, one apprentice asked. Why is mobility prioritized over ideal healing conditions? Daniel gave a long sigh. We don't heal in a vacuum. Life keeps going. Kids still need breakfast. Rent still shows up. So we limp. We grit. We improvise. You choose lesser healing for continuity? No. We accept it. It's different. The room was quiet for a moment, filled only with the soft ticking of Daniel's heart monitor. Ulu gestured for the projection to change. Now it showed an overlay of previous skeletal traumas. Old fractures in the femur, microlesions along the humerus, even a healed orbital fracture. You have not had an easy existence. Daniel smirked faintly. Nobody does. We just all pretend someone else has it worse. Outside the chamber, a status alert flashed yellow. Another trauma had just come in. Viralian engineer with lacerated spiracles after a containment breach. The apprentices moved to assist, but Ulu lingered. May I test your thermal retention? He asked. Sure, Daniel said. A set of infrared pulses swept over him. The data came back strange. Despite the cool air, his core temperature was holding. Not only that, it was stabilizing his peripheral tissues faster than predicted. I increased your chamber temperature yesterday, Ulu said. You adjusted to the new environment in less than 12 hours. Is that fast? For a mammal with a ruptured organ, yes. Daniel shifted again, wincing. We're used to changing conditions. You either adjust or get buried. Ulu filed the data away. Then, before leaving, he asked, This hair, does it continue to grow indefinitely? Yep, shave it, it comes back, sometimes thicker. Thus, inefficient. You keep saying that like it's a bad thing. Ulu left the chamber deep in thought. Later that day, Daniel was visited by Nira, the station's liaison officer, and one of the few non-medical Virelians who had spent extended time around humans. She entered without ceremony, carrying what looked like a thermos. Brought you something, she said. Daniel looked at the container. Is it edible? It's coffee, reconstructed from Earth botanical samples. I figured you'd need the boost. He raised an eyebrow and took a tentative sip. Bitter. Slightly acidic. It wasn't diner grape sludge, but it was close. You've been studying us long. 6 years, cultural liaison. You're my 8th human. Lucky number. Ah. Nira sat beside his chamber. You confuse us. Your species shouldn't have survived its planetary trials. Environmental extremes, apex predators, pathogen evolution, and yet here you are, with hair. Blame my dad's side. She tilted her head. That phrase, it implies lineage responsibility. You attribute your traits to ancestral randomization? Yeah, it's our way of saying, this mess isn't my fault, but I'm rolling with it anyway. Nira considered that. Our kind programs offspring traits with deliberate genomic filters. You seem content with entropy. We don't always get to pick the cards, we just get to play them well. Later that night, Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his cot. He felt the ribs pulling. The pain was real, deep, and biting. He reached for the console to request a position change and groaned as the movement sent sharp signals up his spine. He lay back, breathing shallow, sweat dampening his temples. He didn't feel strong. Not then, not resilient, just exhausted. Ulu returned just after second cycle, watching silently as Daniel winced through another adjustment. I thought you were adept. Daniel muttered, just not quietly. Ulu activated the diagnostic display again. Your endurance is not infinite. Never said it was. You will rest. That is not a request. Daniel exhaled slowly. You got it, Doc. Ulu didn't leave. He watched a little longer, as if trying to understand the precise point where strength turned into vulnerability. He studied the sweat glistening on Daniel's skin. Another strange method of cooling. No other known species released water to regulate temperature. This fluid loss, wouldn't it dehydrate you? Only if you don't drink enough, Daniel said. You force internal balance through external loss. Pretty much. That's madness. Daniel gave a tired grin. It's human. Daniel's 4th week on the Varelian vessel marked the slow transition from patient to anomaly understudy. His recovery, while grueling and far from complete, followed an eerily consistent path of slow but unshakable progress. The ribs hadn't fused fully, but they had calcified enough for assisted mobility. He was walking now, awkward, stiff, and at a glacial pace, but upright nonetheless. A week earlier, he'd barely been able to sit up without pain blooming across his torso. Now he was navigating a therapy track lined with motion scanners and cushioning rails. Ulu monitored from an overhead gallery, observing without interruption. The human's gait was uneven. He favored his right side. The deep tissue damage along his left flank still interfered with full range of motion. The strange part wasn't the limp. It was that Daniel insisted on walking it out. Declined exosupport, declined nerve-suppressing medication, stating it made his head foggy. He preferred feeling the pain, not because he liked it, but because it reminded him the healing wasn't finished. You are deliberately accepting discomfort, Ulu observed that day, floating beside him after the 6th therapy lap. Pain tells me where the limits are, Daniel said between ragged breaths. If I don't feel it, I'll overdo it, make things worse. Most beings avoid such feedback. We're not most beings. His pulse was elevated. Sweat glistened across his hairline. Not even warm in the room, but he was dripping. You are overheating, Ulu said. I'll cool down, give it a minute. You waste fluid, lose salt. And drink more water. Problem solved. Ulu tapped the data panel. Why hasn't your species developed thermal diffusion membranes? We did. They're called T-shirts. That night, Daniel slept in the recovery dorm instead of his isolation chamber. Nara visited again, carrying a small box of printed earth protein bars. Flavors approximated, she warned, offering one that resembled peanut butter. He tore into it with surprising hunger. This actually doesn't taste like despair, progress. You are healing, she noted. Slowly, but yeah. You appear different now. Let me guess, hairier? She blinked. No. Your posture, it's more vertical, Daniel chuckled. Standing up straight is a luxury when you're not being stabbed by your own rib cage. Her gaze lingered on the scars across his arms, and the purpled bruises that still hadn't fully faded. You've taken significant trauma. Most species would not have survived your cumulative injuries, certainly not without bio-augmentation. Well, we cheat differently, he said, biting another piece off the bar. We don't optimize, we adjust. Is that the same as survival? No, he said quietly. But it keeps you alive long enough to find something better. Later, in the diagnostic archives, Ulu compiled a profile, not just of Daniel, but of other humans who had passed through Varelian clinics. The same patterns emerged. No natural armor, no redundant organs, susceptible to extremes of heat and cold. And yet, a woman who walked on a shattered ankle after a shuttle crash, her bone never reset properly, but fused well enough for her to keep going. A teenage technician who sustained electrical burns across 30% of his body, refused full dermal grafts, wanted to keep the scars, said they reminded him not to rush diagnostics. A miner who pulled a colleague from a tunnel collapse while breathing ash-thick air, collapsed from lung trauma and walked again 3 months later. They didn't regenerate. They rebuilt, cracked, bent, sometimes crooked, but functional. It was unsettling and compelling. By the 5th week, Daniel was allowed into the central biome for supervised walking under natural gravity. The synthetic forest mimicked Earth conditions, an experiment in comfort for recovering Terrans. Ulu joined him under the artificial sun, trailing half a meter behind. Daniel paused near a tall fern and leaned against a synthetic tree. "First thing I'm doing when I get home is lie in a real bed, on my side, without screaming. You may resume side sleeping in 2 more weeks," Ulu said. "Only 2? What luxury!" He was tired. The walk had drained him. His muscles weren't ready for full-body exertion yet. But he'd asked for it, because doing nothing made him feel worse. "You remember when you asked why we're so hairy?" Daniel said suddenly. "Yes. My grandpa used to say it was evolution's way of apologizing for everything else it put us through." Ulu considered this. "You use humor to address trauma. Laughter's cheaper than therapy." "There's no pattern to the hair growth," Ulu said, gesturing at the dense patches across Daniel's chest. "Why retain it in some regions but not others?" "Beats me. Maybe it kept our ancestors warm in caves. Or made us look intimidating." "You do not look intimidating." Daniel laughed. "Give it time. The beard's coming back." They rested under the synthetic tree in silence. Ulu watched as Daniel removed the wrap from his side to let the air touch the healing skin. The surgical site was closed, but the bruises still bloomed like ink stains. He wasn't healed yet. But he would be. Because that's what humans did. Not gracefully, not efficiently, but stubbornly, one fractured rib at a time. "I still don't understand you," Ulu said. Daniel nodded. "Join the club." By the 7th week, Daniel's limp had faded to a mild stiffness. The bone scans confirmed what he already felt in every motion. The ribs were mending properly. Not perfect yet, but knit enough to breathe deep without the punch of pain. The spleen had regenerated enough vascular supply to resume normal function. Still, the scar remained faintly visible, a slender curve etched across his left flank. He didn't mind it. Scars, he'd told Nero once, were receipts. You kept them to remember what it cost. The ship's medical wing had cleared him for light labor, and although he wasn't back in engineering, he'd started volunteering in the cargo bay, sorting supply crates, running diagnostics on atmosphere seals. Nothing strenuous. Enough to feel useful. Ulu watched him closely through that phase, not with suspicion, but with a methodical interest that had turned from medical curiosity to something closer to respect. He no longer studied Daniel the way a biologist might study an exotic frog. Now, he asked questions that carried weight. "What would you do," Ulu said during a lunch interval, "if you suffered these injuries again?" Daniel took a bite of the ration bar. Chicken flavor, though the resemblance was mostly conceptual. "Heal again. You would survive a second trauma of equal magnitude?" "If I had to. And if not," Daniel paused. "Then I wouldn't. That's the gamble." Ulu tilted his head. "You accept mortality so casually. No one's casual about it, but it's always there, so you make peace. Or you go crazy." They sat together for a while, the quiet between them unspoken but easy. The corridor beyond buzzed faintly with crew activity. "You know," Daniel said after a moment, "you were right about our flaws. Our bodies are inefficient, but efficiency's not always the best tool. Sometimes, being a little messy makes you harder to break." Ulu turned that over in his mind. "Explain." "You optimize a system, and you remove the excess. That works great until something hits it wrong. Then it snaps. But if the system's a little crooked, it bends first." Ulu gave a short hum. "We do not design for bend. We design for repeatability." "Exactly, but humans were built by accidents. Our bodies learned to tolerate chaos. That's what hair is, that's what sweat is, what pain is. None of it's efficient, but it all keeps us here. Redundancy through discomfort?" 3 days later, a Class 2 hull breach forced the virility gun to partial lockdown. A coolant line had sheared during a maintenance run on the lower decks. One of the fusion regulators triggered a pressure feedback loop. Nothing catastrophic, but the affected section filled with vaporized glycol and electrical arcs. It wasn't fatal, but it was chaos. Daniel was already in the subdeck when it happened, inspecting pressure seals with a technician. The moment alarms sounded, he moved fast, painfully, but without hesitation. He helped haul two smaller Viralines out of the spill corridor and directed the fire-dampening foam into the heart of the reaction chamber. Took a dose of coolant vapor straight to his back, right through his shirt. They got the system stabilized in under 5 minutes. Later, in medbay again, shirtless, skin red and blotchy along the shoulders, Daniel sat on the edge of the table while Ulu applied a soothing gel to the burns. Second-degree contact, minor blistering, no dermal breach, Ulu said. Daniel grimaced as the gel cooled his skin. Won't be modeling swimwear this week. You should have waited for emergency crews. I was there. I did what I could. You could have exacerbated your injuries. I did. Ulu stared at him. And yet, you would do it again. Daniel didn't answer right away. He watched the burn pattern spreading in uneven splotches across his shoulder. You ever seen a forest regrow after a wildfire? He asked. Ulu blinked. Yes. It is a standard model of ecological succession. Scorched earth, broken canopy, everything looks dead. But give it time and something always finds a way to grow through the ash. Ulu paused, pressing a fresh patch along Daniel's spine. That is how you see your species, something that keeps growing back. A week after the incident, Daniel was officially discharged. Nira saw him off from the hangar, standing beside the Virilian transport that would shuttle him to the Accord outpost on Tricera Station for full debriefing and clearance. "You're sure you're cleared to travel?" she asked. "Doc says I'll feel like garbage for a couple more weeks, but everything's solid. No fluid in the lungs, spleen's behaving, ribs are strong enough to sneeze without blacking out." She raised an eyebrow. "That's your metric for recovery?" "Absolutely." Ulu arrived just before departure, carrying a slim data crystal. "Your medical file," he said, offering it. "Also, my notes." Daniel accepted it. "Notes?" "An anatomical study of human adaptive response. It includes behavioral observations, unstructured resilience, motivated endurance. It may aid our understanding of your species in future encounters." Daniel tucked the crystal into his satchel. "Glad I could be a useful lab rat." Ulu hesitated. "You were not a subject. You were instructive." That caught Daniel off guard. He reached for the boarding ramp, then turned back. "Tell your students to add this to the record. We don't heal because it's easy. We heal because we have to." He paused, a small grin tugging at the edge of his mouth. "And the hair? That's just a bonus." Ulu inclined his head, uncharacteristically still. As the shuttle doors hissed shut and the craft lifted from the deck, Nera turned to Ulu. "You're not going to forget him, are you?" "No," Ulu said quietly. "There is much we design, but what they endure, we cannot replicate that. Not in genome, not in programming. They are not built for perfection." Nira folded her arms. "They're built for the aftermath." Ulu watched the shuttle vanish into the black. And for the first time in his long career, he wondered if imperfection was its own kind of design.